The first thing they pulled from the drained reservoir wasn't a bone. It was a box. A rusted metal case, half fused with silt and lakestone, dragged up by a pair of survey chains. The rescue team stood around it in a loose circle, none of them speaking at first. The reservoir had been emptied for repairs, nothing more. But everyone felt it, the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that sits heavy on your skin. When they pried the case open, the smell hit them first. Rot, metal, and something else. Something like old rain trapped underground. Inside were 3 items, each worse than the last. A stack of journals, soaked and rotted around the edges. A cracked field recorder with its battery pack fused into the casing, and a single military dog tag. But the bottom half of it was melted into a strip of hardened organic material. Like cartilage. Like it had grown around the metal instead of simply sticking to it. No one touched it with bare hands. They logged everything, bagged it, photographed it, and then passed it off to analysis. The recorder took days to coax into life. When it finally crackled on, the only thing that came through at first was static. Then a low, rhythmic thud, like something striking the underside of a massive hollow drum. That's when the voice started. Old, exhausted, but steady enough to make everyone in the room stop moving. If you're hearing this, understand one thing. It does not stay in the water. It remembers the ones who enter. There was a long pause, broken only by the faint pressure thud in the background. The kind of sound you don't hear with your ears. You feel it in your ribs. Then pages turned, and the voice continued, weaker now, like the man was reading in the dark. We thought Station 9 was abandoned. Nothing but a Cold War relic stranded on a dead lake. But the wildlife was gone. Even insects didn't cross the shoreline. And the water didn't move unless something beneath it wanted it to. Another pause. A sharp inhale from the speaker, followed by a whisper. I saw a ripple move against the wind. Like the lake was breathing. Static surged, and for a moment the recording warped, then returned with the man's voice shaking, trying to stay level. We found bones on the first night. Not scattered, not clawed, not broken by impact. Folded. Bent inward. Like whatever killed them wanted to see how far a spine could bend before it snapped. The rescue team listening to the recording exchanged looks. One of them reached toward the dog tag again, but didn't touch it. The fused organic strip seemed to pulse slightly in the fluorescent light, probably a trick of the reflection. But nobody wanted to be the one to confirm. The voice kept going. I've marked every sound, every thud, every time the lake rose when no wind touched it. Something lives beneath that water. Something old. Something patient. Again, that deep pressure thud rolled through the speakers. One of the techs stepped back from the desk like the sound had pushed him. Then the final line came, quiet, broken, but clear enough that not a single person in the room misunderstood what he meant. We thought we were alone at Station A9. We were wrong. Something lived beneath the lake, and it woke when we touched its floor. The recording ended there, but the echo of the thud stayed long after the speakers went silent. Before we go further, subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The journals inside the metal case didn't just describe events, they described the people who were there. And once the analysts finished restoring the pages, the story began to shift backward to 1954, when everything started. It was the Cold War, a time when every unexplored place was treated like a potential threat. Command wanted maps of anything that didn't already exist on paper, so they assembled a joint patrol and sent them into the mountains. 3 soldiers, 2 civilian scientists, 1 government surveyor, and 1 local guide who agreed to join only after being paid in advance. Their orders sounded simple. Trace a chain of high-altitude lakes, collect soil and water samples, chart elevation, mark safe routes, return before weather closed in. But the briefing included details none of them liked hearing. Hunters missing without a trace, livestock found with every bone bent inward, reports of sudden migraines, nosebleeds, and fainting near the water. Locals called it pressure sickness, a name that didn't explain anything but warned plenty. The guide tried to refuse the job twice. When asked why, he repeated the same line he'd grown up hearing from the elders. The water is older than us. The lake has no bottom. Whatever fell in never touched earth again. He said it calmly, like someone repeating a fact he didn't want questioned. Still, the patrol pushed forward. The region wasn't on any map, and that alone made it important to the people in charge. The scientists insisted the sickness could be explained. Volcanic gas, mineral concentration, maybe magnetic anomalies. The soldiers didn't care about the reason. Their job was to keep the others alive long enough to finish the survey. They hiked for days, climbing narrow switchbacks, crossing ridgelines where the clouds crawled across the rock like living things. Wildlife thinned out with every mile. Birds stopped appearing entirely. Even insects seemed to avoid the trail as the patrol reached higher ground. The guide grew quieter, answering questions with nods instead of words. When they reached the outer ridge overlooking the Valley of Lakes, the wind died in an instant. No breeze, no rustle. The air felt heavy, like it was pushing down rather than moving through. None of them realized it then, but that was the first warning. The moment the world began behaving in ways it shouldn't, and once they descended toward the water, nothing would behave normally again. The descent into the valley should have been simple, a slow walk down a narrow trail cut into the rock. But the moment the patrol left the ridge, the world changed. Fog rolled in fast, thicker than anything the mountains should have produced. It wasn't drifting or swirling like normal mist. It sat low, heavy, unmoving, almost like a blanket pulled tight across the valley floor. By the time they reached the first switchback, visibility was down to a few meters. No one spoke for a while. The soldiers kept checking the tree line, expecting movement. The scientists whispered measurements under their breath. The guide stayed a few steps behind everyone, eyes fixed on the ground instead of the fog. And the strangest thing was the silence. A valley like this should have carried the calls of birds, insects, even small animals in the brush. But there was nothing. No chirping. No fluttering. No distant rustling. Just a thick, dead stillness. At one point, Sergeant Hawley cupped his hands and shouted down the slope to test the distance. But the noise didn't return. No echo. No bounce from the rock walls. It was as if the air swallowed the sound. He tried again, louder this time, same result. Corporal Maddox tapped the barrel of his rifle against a stone outcrop. The metallic ring should have traveled. Instead, it just stopped. The scientists took notes. The soldiers exchanged glances, and the guide muttered something under his breath. When asked what he said, he refused to repeat it. Hours later, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the lake, a dark sheet of water stretching out across the valley floor. It looked calm, untouched, almost perfectly smooth. Too smooth. No ripples, no wind pushing the surface, no insects drifting above it, nothing. The captain pointed toward a narrow peninsula where they could set camp and approach the shoreline. But the guide shook his head immediately. "We do not go to the center," he said. "We keep to the edges." Hawley scoffed. "Why?" "It's just water." The guide didn't answer. He only raised a hand toward the lake, as if warning them without wanting to explain. They kept moving, and the closer they got, the heavier the air felt. Not metaphorically, literally heavier. Every breath came with a slight pressure, like someone was pushing a palm gently against their chest. The scientists blamed altitude, but they all knew altitude didn't behave like this. Then came the first sound. A low percussive thud, deep enough to vibrate through their boots. Not loud, not sudden, more like a slow heartbeat coming from beneath the lake bed. Everyone stopped. Another thud followed, this time slightly stronger. The guide's face drained of color. He stepped back from the shoreline and refused to come closer. The water reacted next. A section near the center lifted upward, not splashing, not breaking, but rising in a smooth dome, as if something pressed from below with perfect control. It held for a moment, then sank back into place with hardly a ripple. Holly reached for his weapon. Maddox whispered a curse. The scientists tried to explain it away. Maybe gas pockets, maybe thermal inversion, maybe seismic activity. But even they didn't sound convinced. The guide shook his head again. "That is not the Earth," he said quietly. "The Earth does not breathe." No one responded. Minutes later, the headaches began. A dull pressure building behind the eyes. Then sharp pulses at the temples. One of the scientists staggered and nearly fell to his knees. Hale complained of ringing in his skull. Maddox pressed his palms against the sides of his head until his knuckles whitened. The pain eased only when they stepped back from the shoreline. And through all of it, every person felt the same thing. A presence, not around them, not above them, below. A watching sensation, like standing on a glass floor with something staring up through it. Every instinct in their bodies screamed that there was something underneath, something aware, something patient. The guide refused to take another step. He sat down on the rocks, arms wrapped around his knees, shaking his head repeatedly. "We go back," he whispered. "We go now." But the captain didn't listen. Orders were orders, and the lakes had to be mapped. None of them realized it yet. But the first warning had already happened. The fog, the silence, the missing echoes, the pressure, the dome of water. The valley had noticed them, and whatever lived beneath the surface was beginning to rise. The patrol pushed deeper along the shoreline, trying to ignore the pressure in their skulls and the way the valley seemed to swallow every sound. The guide refused to walk first now. He stayed behind the soldiers, eyes fixed on the water as if expecting something to break the surface at any moment. The others tried to focus on the mission. Samples, measurements, notes. Anything to convince themselves they were still doing normal work. They weren't. About 100 meters from where they first felt the headaches, Maddox stopped abruptly and raised a hand. Something was lying just beyond the tree line, half hidden in a patch of flattened brush. At first it looked like driftwood or a collapsed tent pole. But when Hale stepped closer, the shape became clearer and wrong. It was a mule, or what was left of one. The carcass was untouched on the outside. No claw marks, no tearing, no signs of a predator. The hide was intact, not even punctured. But the skeleton underneath had been bent. Every bone arched forward into a tight crescent shape, as if the animal had been folded slowly, carefully, without breaking the skin. Its legs curved inward. The spine curved inward. Even the skull was compressed into the same unnatural arc. It looked like something had pressed the mule into itself. Hale staggered back. What the hell did that? There were no drag marks around it. No prints in the mud. No disturbance in the soil. The mule hadn't been carried here. It hadn't been attacked here. It had simply collapsed in this perfect, horrific shape. The scientists tried to examine it, but the smell hit them first. A harsh wave of iron, algae, and something else, something sharp and metallic, almost electrical, like the scent that comes off overheated wiring. Maddox doubled over and vomited into the leaves. Even the guide stepped back, pressing a cloth to his mouth. The captain forced himself closer and crouched beside the carcass. The hide was cold, damp, and slightly swollen, like it had been submerged in water far longer than a land animal should have been. One of the scientists touched the skin with a gloved finger, then immediately jerked his hand back. "It's humming," he said. "There's a vibration in the bones." No one responded. The guide finally broke his silence, voice barely above a whisper. "This happens near the center," he said. "This is where the water reaches, even on dry ground." The captain tried to brush it off. Maybe seismic pressure, maybe extreme decomposition, maybe some kind of disease. But none of those explanations fit. Not the smell, not the perfect crescent bend, not the total lack of external damage, and not the way, for a moment, The mule's body seemed to twitch, not from wind, not from insects, but from something shifting deep inside the spine. Holly backed away fast. "We shouldn't stay here," he said. "Whatever did this, it's close." And for once, no one argued. They moved away from the mule carcass as quickly as they could, but the smell followed them for a while, clinging to the air, clinging to their clothes, clinging to the inside of their throats. By the time they found a relatively dry patch of ground near the shoreline, daylight was already fading. The captain ordered them to set up camp there, arguing that turning back now would mean climbing the ridge in darkness, something none of them wanted. The guide didn't speak. He just kept glancing at the lake as if expecting it to rise and swallow the shore. They pitched 2 canvas tents, built a small fire pit, and tried to create a sense of normal routine. Holly collected fallen branches. Maddox checked the gear. The scientists sorted samples and notes. None of it really mattered. The air still felt heavy, still pressed against their chests, still absorbed every sound before it could travel. When the sun finally slipped behind the ridge, the valley dimmed in a way that didn't feel natural. Light didn't fade. It folded, like someone dialed the brightness of the whole world down in one slow motion. The fire they built burned, but its crackle was strangely muffled. Even sparks that popped upward seemed quieter than they should have been. By the time they settled in for the night, everyone was tense. The guide refused to sleep inside a tent. He wrapped himself in a blanket near the entrance with his back against a log, staring at the water. One of the scientists asked him why. He only answered, "Canvas hides things you need to hear." No one pushed further. Sometime past midnight, after the fire burned low and after the patrol had fallen into thin, restless sleep, a sound drifted across the valley. A single, slow step, not on Laudon, on water. The first one was faint, like someone pressing a heavy boot onto a soaked wooden plank. A deep, wet thump. Hollis sat up instantly. Maddox froze in place. The captain unzipped his tent halfway and stayed perfectly still. Then came another step, and another, and another. Slow, measured, pacing, it walked across the lake's surface. Not splashing, not waiting, walking. Each footfall producing a dull, heavy displacement, just enough to make tiny rings spread outward before dissolving into the blackness. There was no visible figure. The guide began to chant quietly, rocking slightly where he sat. Not loudly, just under his breath. A rhythm meant to keep something away rather than invite anything in. The soldiers glanced at him, but none dared interrupt. Holly whispered, "Is something out there?" The guide didn't answer. His chanting only grew steadier. Another step. Closer. The captain signaled everyone to stay still. His hand hovered over his rifle, but he didn't lift it. They all listened. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. Step. The pacing grew slow, deliberate, as if whatever was out there was listening back, measuring, waiting. Then the sound shifted. A deeper displacement, like weight leaning down, followed by a subtle pull, as if the water was being dragged in a direction it did not want to move. The entire camp held its breath. Then, silence. Not fading, not coming, just stopped. The guide's chanting ended mid-word. He stared forward, eyes fixed on the darkness between the lake and the shore. Seconds passed, a minute. Nobody moved. And that's when it happened. Something pressed against the canvas of the nearest tent. Not a hand, not a paw. A wet, heavy breath. Slow, moist, exhaling directly through the fabric, inches from Hale's face on the other side. The canvas dipped inward slightly, as if something long and smooth rested against it. Hale clamped a hand over his mouth to keep from making a sound. Every soldier froze. The scientist didn't breathe. The breath came again, lower, dragging, almost curious. Then, just as suddenly, it withdrew. Canvas popped back into shape. Ripples rolled across the lake without wind. And whatever had stood there was gone. No one slept after that. They waited for sunrise in silence, listening to every shift of water, every twitch of the canvas, every faint hiss of wind. By dawn, the guide finally spoke. "This was only warning," he said. And no one doubted him. The sun rose slowly over the valley, but it didn't bring comfort. The fog still hung low, the pressure still sat heavy in their chests, and every person in the patrol kept glancing at the lake as if expecting footsteps to start again. They tried to return to routine, boil water, pack samples, check gear. But routine didn't feel real anymore. It was one of the scientists, Dr. Kessler, who finally broke the silence that lingered after the night's encounter. He sat near the dying fire, notebook open, rubbing the side of his head where the pressure pain had settled into a dull throb. "I know what it's doing," he said quietly. The others looked at him, unsure if he meant the creature or the valley itself. Kessler turned the notebook around so they could see his sketches. Waves, vibrations, ripple lines mapped across rough drawings of the lake. "It's using pressure, like echolocation, but not sound. Something lower. Deeper, we feel it as headaches. It feels us as movement." Hala frowned. "You're saying it sees with, what? Force?" "Pressure waves," Kessler continued. "It sends them out like pulses. They bounce off anything with mass, but living things, especially warm bodies, give off patterns, heartbeat, breathing, even the vibration of muscles." He tapped the notebook again. "It can map us, not by sight, not by smell, by rhythm." The guide nodded slowly, as if this matched stories he'd heard all his life. Kessler wasn't done. "And near the surface, it flattens itself. That's why we never see it clearly. It becomes a ribbon, thin enough to disappear into the water's reflection. The dome we saw yesterday, that wasn't the creature rising. It was adjusting shape." The captain stared at him. "Are you saying it knows where we are?" Kessler hesitated, then nodded. "And it remembers." Those words hung in the air. The soldiers didn't argue. They didn't scoff. After last night, anything seemed possible. But the theory wasn't the worst part of the morning. The first attack was, they needed water. No one wanted to get close to the lake, but there was no choice. Holly volunteered first, muttering that he'd rather get it done than sit around imagining things. The captain agreed and sent him with Maddox to fill the canteens. The others stayed at camp, packing what little gear they had scattered. A few minutes passed, nothing unusual. Then Maddox came running back, alone. He wasn't shouting. That was the strange part. He wasn't screaming or panicked. He looked stunned, pale, his eyes unfocused. He gasped out a few words. "He's gone. Hale's gone." The captain grabbed him. "Gone how?" Maddox swallowed hard. He was standing right next to me. Then the water moved, and he wasn't there anymore." They armed themselves fast, rifles, flares, rope. The guide refused to take a weapon, whispering a prayer under his breath instead. They followed Maddox down the small slope toward the lake. Hale's footprints led straight to the waterline. The mud around them was undisturbed. No drag marks, no struggle. Just a pair of boot prints ending cleanly at the shore. Something floated a few meters out. For a moment, they thought it was a log. It wasn't. It was Hale. His body drifted slowly toward them, face down, arms limp at his sides. They rushed in knee-deep to pull him out. The guide begged them not to touch the water again, but they ignored him. When they turned Hale over, Maddox stumbled back. The body was intact. No claw marks, no bite marks. The skin looked untouched, except for faint circular impressions around the joints, small suction-like marks, almost too light to notice. But the real horror was his posture. Hale's spine was bent backwards. Not broken, bent. His head touched his heels in a perfect arch, as if the same force that folded the mule days earlier had shaped him exactly the same way. His ribs strained under the skin, but none had pierced through. His arms were twisted backward, but not snapped. His face was frozen in an expression that wasn't pain. It was confusion. The captain whispered, "This wasn't violence. This was examination." Kessler knelt beside the corpse, trembling as he pressed a hand near the suction marks. "It felt him," he muttered. "It mapped him, and then it rearranged him." Before anyone could respond, the recorder they'd left running earlier crackled in the captain's pocket. A sound played back, a low moan from underwater. Not a whale song, not a vibration of earth. Something between mechanical and biological. A drawn-out metallic groan that rose in pitch before fading into static. The guide stepped back, shaking his head violently. No, that is calling. It knows he is gone. It listens for the rest. The captain ordered everyone to return to camp immediately. They carried Hale's body with them, laying him gently near the fire pit. Maddox refused to look at him. Kessler scribbled frantic notes. The guide tied small knots in a strip of cloth, chanting quietly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. No one spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. The message was clear. The mule had been a warning. Holly was the confirmation. Something beneath the lake wasn't just territorial. It was intelligent. It was curious. And it was watching them more closely than they realized. As they tried to decide what to do next, the recorder, still sitting on the ground, crackled again. This time the mechanical moan was followed by something else. A pulse. A rhythmic beat. Slow, steady, deep. Kessler's eyes widened. "That's heartbeat mapping," he whispered. "It's scanning us right now. All of us." Silence settled over the camp. And somewhere far out on the lake, the surface rose in a perfect dome. Then flattened again. Whatever lived beneath the water wasn't done. And now it had Hale's rhythm memorized, and theirs too. The decision to leave the valley came fast, driven by fear and the sight of Hale's folded body. No one argued. They had a single plan left: build the small canvas raft they carried for crossings and push toward the farther bank, where a thin channel led out of the valley. If they could reach it, the current might pull them far enough away from the lake center. The wind picked up as they worked, rustling the trees and pushing cold air down their backs, but the water didn't respond. Not a ripple. Not a shift. It remained completely smooth, like glass. Maddox stopped tying a knot and stared. "Wind's wrong," he murmured. "Lake's not feeling it." Dr. Kessler didn't look up from the raft. His hands shook as he worked. "It's because the surface isn't free," he said. "It's being held still." The guide stopped breathing for a moment. "By what?" he asked. Kessler didn't answer. When the raft was finally ready, they pushed it slowly onto the water. It floated without sound, not even a slight splash. The lake absorbed the weight without reacting at all. The captain motioned them on board. Maddox took the front, Kessler and the guide held the center, and the captain kept to the rear. Every movement felt too loud, even though no sound escaped. Their breaths felt like they were being dragged into the air. About 10 meters from shore, they felt it. A pressure wave rose beneath the raft, slow, steady, too uniform to be natural. The canvas floor lifted just a few centimeters, then settled again as something massive passed under them. Not fast, not aggressive, almost curious. The guide covered his ears and bowed his head. Kessler leaned forward, eyes wide. "If we move," he whispered, "it sees us." No one argued. They froze, completely. The raft drifted a few inches, nudged by nothing they could see. Minutes passed. Long, suffocating minutes where every breath seemed too loud. The water remained perfectly still. Kessler's hands hovered over his knees, shaking. Maddox bit down on his tongue to keep from making noise. The captain watched the surface for any sign of movement, not even a bubble. Then the raft tilted, just slightly, as if something pressed a flat mass against the underside for a moment. They remained perfectly still. Another pressure pulse pushed upward, soft, testing, like fingers pressing along the hull. Kessler's voice shook. "It's mapping our heartbeats. Don't move. Don't change rhythm." The guide's breathing hitched, then slowed. The lake remained quiet. But the silence felt wrong, as if the entire valley was listening with them. Another wave passed under the raft, heavier this time. The fabric creaked. A single drop of water slid across the surface and hung there, defying the wind. Maddox trembled. "Captain." The captain raised a hand sharply. Silence. The pressure pulse returned, stronger than faded, and the raft stopped moving entirely. For a moment, it felt like the lake held them in place. Then, slowly, the pressure drifted away. No splash, no rise, just a gradual loosening beneath their feet. The captain finally breathed. "Row soft, no noise." They obeyed, dipping their paddles with painful care, each stroke slow, controlled. The raft moved inch by inch, pushed more by fear than strength. No one looked back. No one spoke. Every man aboard knew the truth now. It didn't need eyes. It heard them, and it remembered. They kept moving until the shore finally came into view through the fog. A thin line of mud and roots that felt like the only safe place. They reached the far bank slowly, fighting every instinct to run the moment their boots touched ground. The raft slid onto the mud with barely a sound, and the captain signaled for everyone to move deeper into the tree line. They were 20 steps in when it happened. A metallic snap. Small, sharp, innocent. Maddox's chest buckle gave way under the weight of his pack, the clasp cracking in half and falling to the mud. The sound, though tiny, echoed unnaturally across the lake. For a full second, no one breathed. Then the water erupted. It didn't explode upward like a breached whale. It rose. Outward, expanding. A wall of shifting liquid that bulged higher and higher, forming a curve so wide it swallowed the horizon behind it. A shape, serpentine yet mantle-like, broke the surface with impossible silence. No splash, no crash. It emerged as though the water parted willingly around it. Kessler gasped. "That's not a creature, that's a boundary." The thing stretched, unfolding layer after layer of itself. Its body was vast, like a ribbon mixed with a fin. Mixed with something that had never been intended to exist in air. It moved without displacing water. The lake stayed glass flat beneath its bulk. The guide screamed for them to run. But the creature didn't go for the shore. It went for the raft. The long, flat mass descended on it, curling, spiraling, wrapping around the canvas like a constricting belt. The raft didn't crack or burst. It compressed silently, flattening under invisible pressure. Maddox watched, shaking violently, as the raft shrunk into itself like paper being rolled tight. Then came the worst part. Hands, human hands, reached up. Hale's hands. Or what was left of them. They didn't grab the raft. They didn't claw. They simply floated upward for a moment before being pulled down again by the creature's folding movements. Maddox clamped both hands over his mouth. Kessler whispered something unintelligible. The captain pulled them back toward the trees. But the lake wasn't done. Shapes beneath the surface moved, long shadows twisting, dividing, merging, until one rose directly beneath the raft. It lifted the crushed canvas in total silence, then pulled the first victim down. No splash, just absence. A form disappeared into the water like a light being switched off. The second went next. A scientist, gone without a ripple, then the third. Every disappearance was the same instant, clean, noiseless. Kessler shook violently. It's matching their heartbeats, one by one. The captain grabbed his arm. Move, now. The remaining survivors sprinted up the bank, stumbling over exposed roots, pushing through wet brush, every breath louder than it should have been. Behind them, the creature lowered itself again. The water swallowed it with unnatural smoothness. But it didn't stay swallowed. It followed, not swimming. Crawling. The sound came first. A low, dragging hum, like wet leather sliding over stone. Then the mass rose from the lake, flattening itself against the mud, reshaping its body in slow, pulsing waves. Limbs formed where none had been. Not legs, not arms, but thick protrusions that shifted their own mass inside, forming joints where needed. It crawled by redistributing itself. Each section bulged forward, anchored, then pulled the rest of the body along. Kessler whispered, horrified. It's molding itself, adapting to land. And worst of all, it had no eyes. A smooth surface where a face should have been. No mouth, no nostrils. Just the faint outline of sensory canals that pulsed like gills. It's tracking us by heartbeat, Kessler said. We need to hide the rhythm. The guide shoved his hands into the mud, burying his wrists until they vanished beneath the wet soil. Do as I do, he whispered. Muffle the pulse. Maddox hesitated only a second before copying him. The captain plunged his hands into the mud. Kessler followed, trembling violently. For a moment, it worked. The creature halted, its body flattening like a giant sheet pressed onto the ground. The sensory canals pulsed wider, sweeping the landscape, searching, calibrating. Silence pressed against them like weight. A single heartbeat out of rhythm could give them away. Then Maddox broke. He couldn't hold his breath anymore. Panic overtook him. He inhaled sharply, chest rising fast, pulse hammering against his ribs. The creature jerked toward him instantly, not gliding, snapping. A convulsive motion, the entire body contracting, then launching forward in a perfect line. Maddox screamed and scrambled backward, hands slipping in the mud. The captain reached for him, but the creature was too fast. It wrapped a ribbon-like appendage around his torso, flattening him against the ground before pulling him upward in one horrifying motion. There was no tearing, no blood, just folding. Maddox bent in a way human bodies never should. Head and knees pulled slowly toward one another as the creature molded him into the same crescent shape as the mule, as hollow as whatever it had tested before them. His scream cut off instantly. Then he was dragged back toward the lake, silent as a leaf on the ground. Kessler pressed his face into the mud, shaking uncontrollably. The guide whispered a prayer so quietly it barely reached the air. The captain watched Maddox disappear and forced himself not to move, not to cry out, not to let his pulse spike. The creature returned to scanning. Slow pulses, slow sweeps. It moved past them, sensing every heartbeat that dared to shift. Its body shrank and expanded, slithered and crawled, rose and flattened again. It seemed to taste the vibrations in the soil, searching for another living pattern it recognized. The survivors didn't move. They didn't breathe. The captain counted seconds in his mind, forcing his pulse to slow, steady, controlled. The creature paused. For a terrible moment, it hovered only a few feet away, the edge of its mass quivering like a membrane, listening for the faintest tremor. Then, in one smooth motion, it turned, glided back toward the lake, and slipped into the water without a sound. The survivors remained frozen for a full minute. Only when the lake returned to its unnatural calm did the captain finally whisper, "It's not hunting anything that moves. It's hunting anything that lives." They waited until the creature had disappeared fully into the water before they dared to move again. Mud clung to their wrists, stiffening as it dried, but nobody wiped it away. Nobody spoke. They just followed the captain deeper into the tree line until the lake became a muted smear behind them. Kessler finally broke the silence. His voice trembled. "I know what it is now. What it really is." The captain turned, exhausted. "Say it." Kessler pointed toward the lake, hands shaking so hard the mud cracked around his knuckles. "It's not from here. Not from this lake. The lake is just a vent. A breathing point. A hole." The guide closed his eyes as if he already feared the answer. Kessler continued, breath unsteady. "You heard the thuds. You felt them. Those weren't its movements. They weren't echoes. They were heartbeats." Everyone froze. The pressure waves we felt, the headaches, that wasn't the environment. That was circulation. Blood flow that shakes stone. Pressure that travels upward. He drew a trembling line through the dirt with his finger. "That thing doesn't live in this valley. It doesn't even live in the lake. It lives beneath it. Beneath the mountains. Beneath the continent. Vast caverns. Networks of flooded chambers thousands of meters deep. The lake is just where it surfaces to breathe, or to feed, or to see what's changed above. The guide whispered. The elders said the water has no bottom. Kessler nodded. Because it doesn't, not really. A faint tremor rolled through the mud under their feet, so soft they might have mistaken it for their own pulse. But every face turned downward, another thud. Slow. Measured, incredibly deep. The captain whispered, "It's not gone." Kessler stared at the ground, eyes wide with dawning horror. "No," he said. "It was never in the lake to begin with. It was just reaching." Only one of them made it out alive. He never knew if it was luck, or if the creature simply lost interest, or if it memorized the others and didn't need him yet. But somehow he climbed out of the valley, half delirious, covered in dried mud and bruises that pulsed with phantom thuds long after he reached safety. He tried to report what happened. Nobody believed him. The lake was eventually sealed off, the area quarantined, classified, and forgotten. The survivors were listed as lost during mapping operations. Case closed. Decades passed. The valley was dammed, flooded, drained, then abandoned when the reservoir cracked and dried out. Nobody visited anymore, except the teen he returned with. Older, quieter, pretending he wasn't terrified. He didn't volunteer. They asked for experienced personnel who knew the terrain, and he was the only one still alive. He couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, so there he stood again, on the cracked mud floor of the old reservoir, watching the workers drag a rusted metal case out from the dried basin. Inside were the journals, the field recorder. The dog tag fused to something organic. He didn't touch any of it. He just stared at the ground. One worker joked, "Creepy place, huh?" He didn't answer, because he felt it. A hollow beneath the earth. An empty space that shouldn't be empty. And then, the first thud. Soft, deep, exactly like before. The workers froze. What was that? Machinery? He didn't respond. He couldn't. His pulse hammered in his throat. Another thud. Closer, he whispered to himself. The water's gone. But the ground is still breathing. A thin ripple spread across the mud near his boots. Not water, just shifting earth. But the pattern was unmistakable, concentric circles. Pressure waves, searching. The recorder in the metal case crackled for the first time in decades. A low, familiar heartbeat pulsed through the speaker. The last thing he wrote in his new log was simple. It remembers.